Now, my last stage of the literature review process is doing the actual writing, which is possibly the most important part because that's what other people will see. It's potentially one of the more challenging steps, and I know for me it's not necessarily my favourite part of the process. I really love getting on the databases, searching for articles. I love the process of managing and organising, taking notes and engaging with the literature. But when it comes to writing, I find I don't like that stage quite so much. So I've got a few tips to help you with that writing process. Before we get into the writing process though, let's talk about the structure of a good lit review. Ideally, your literature review will have what I call an upside down triangle structure. So the idea is you start out with a very broad topic, and as your lit review progresses, you get more and more specific to the point where you're ready to present your research questions. Now, a good lit review will mean that by the time the reader gets to the research questions, when they see them for the first time, they'll go, well, of course that's the research question. What else could it possibly be? Because everything that led up to that point will be making it very, very clear where the gap in the literature actually is. Now, just to give you an example of that structure gone badly wrong, one of the very first things I learned as a postgrad student was how not to write a lit review. My master's thesis was on the friendships of children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And I remember sending through what I thought was the final draft of my lit review to my supervisor. I had, once again, what I thought was a lovely section on the friendships of children, had another section on ADHD, how you diagnose it, what the characteristics were, etc. I very proudly presented that to my supervisor, who pretty much put a red pen through most of it. I was understandably horrified. I remember he said to me, "Look, Lynn, it's really well written, but your research is actually about friendships of children with ADHD, and you have absolutely nothing on that topic." So I always think of that when I write literature reviews now. They need to be very focused and relate clearly to the research question. I actually like to have my research question above where I'm writing, just so that I can constantly refer back to it. I must say it was a very hard lesson to learn as a master's student, but it's one that stayed with me. One of the things I find quite challenging is actually getting started with a literature review, because it is quite a big task and it can be a little bit overwhelming. So I've included some questions here from a book by Barry White, not the singer, and these are just some starting out questions that you may find useful when you're drafting the review itself. They're also all things though that you might decide to include in your final write-up, so they're useful in that respect as well. So we've got things here like what the purpose of the review is, how key terms will be defined, and what you're going to include and not going to include. I think that's actually a really important thing to do at the outset of a lit review. I know for my PhD thesis at the very beginning, I was quite upfront about the fact that I was only going to use one particular model as my framework. There were 6 possible models that could be used to explain self-regulated learning, which was my topic, and I could have gone through and gone into great detail about all 6 of those. But because I'd made a definite decision to just use one, and because those 6 models had been at great length explained in other books, I just made the comment that I was going to use the particular model that I was and why, and then I referred the reader to the other text they could read if they were interested. I think if you state things like that up front, it means that your reader isn't guessing as to why you're not covering particular topics. Other ideas as a starting point include things like major issues and debates, what the origins of the topic are, and so on. So I'm not going to go through all of those questions on that slide. They are just really a reference for you, but hopefully you'll find those useful in terms of getting underway with your own lit review.